I work at a large, publicly traded company, the kind with open-plan floors, glass conference rooms, and a code of conduct nobody reads unless HR tells you to. I'm mid-level management, senior enough to have meetings stacked back-to-back, junior enough to still be replaceable. I've been there 8 years, long enough that the job feels stable, predictable, and quietly suffocating. At home, things look fine on paper. I've been with my partner for 6 years. We share an apartment, routines, a calendar synced with reminders about groceries and birthdays. There's no abuse, no dramatic conflict, just inertia. We've slipped into a life where love exists more as a concept than a feeling, something we assume is still there, because it always has been. I met her, my colleague, on a Tuesday afternoon during a cross-department meeting that ran late. She was filling in for someone else, sitting 2 chairs down, taking notes too carefully for someone who wasn't directly involved. When she spoke, it wasn't to dominate the room. It was to clarify, to make things make sense. I remember noticing that before I noticed anything else. After the meeting, we ended up walking toward the elevators at the same time. Small talk, complaints about the agenda, the usual corporate decompression. I learned she'd been with the company even longer than I had. I also learned it casually, almost as a disclaimer, that she had a partner too. She said it the way people say, "I'm married," or "I don't drink," not defensively, just as a fact. At the time, it didn't feel like the beginning of anything. It felt like a footnote, the kind you only recognize as important after you've read the rest of the story. We didn't start talking because of attraction. That's the lie I still tell myself when I'm trying to sleep. We started talking because work makes it easy to justify proximity. A follow-up email turned into a Slack thread. A Slack thread turned into a standing check-in just to stay aligned. Nothing inappropriate. Nothing you could screenshot and forward to HR without feeling stupid. What changed wasn't the frequency at first, but the tone. Our messages got longer, less efficient. We'd solve the work problem in 3 lines and then drift complaints about leadership, jokes about corporate buzzwords, observations about people we both knew but never named. There was relief in talking to someone who saw the same absurdities and didn't pretend otherwise. I noticed I started timing my replies. I noticed when her status went green. I noticed how she signed off messages, sometimes formal, sometimes not, and how disappointed I felt when she kept it strictly professional. That's when I should have pulled back. Instead, I leaned in, quietly, telling myself this was normal. Harmless. One afternoon we ended up alone in a conference room after a meeting canceled last minute. We talked for nearly an hour. Not about work. About how strange it feels to build a life and then realize you're just maintaining it. About how relationships don't end so much as they thin out. She didn't say she was unhappy. Neither did I, but we didn't have to. The space between the words did the work for us. I remember thinking, very clearly, this feels dangerous. And then immediately thinking, but also rare. That combination, recognition and restraint failing at the same time, was intoxicating. I went home that night and felt oddly lighter, like I'd told the truth without actually confessing anything. Nothing had happened yet. No rules were broken, but something had shifted. Sympathy had turned into anticipation. And anticipation, I was learning, can be far more destabilizing than action. I want to say the first mistake was a kiss. It wasn't. The first mistake was convincing myself that boundaries were flexible if you never acknowledged crossing them. It happened after work drinks. Not a date, at least that's what I told myself, but a group thing that slowly dissolved as people filtered out. One by one, excuses about early meetings, long commutes, tired partners waiting at home. Eventually it was just the 2 of us, sitting closer than necessary at a high table neither of us had chosen. We talked about everything except the obvious. About how alcohol makes you more honest but also more reckless. About how neither of us were that kind of person. I remember her saying, almost nervously, "This feels like a bad idea," and laughing afterward like it was a joke. I agreed too quickly. When the bar closed, we stood outside longer than we needed to. The city was loud, but that strange bubble had formed, the one where time feels suspended and consequences feel theoretical. She touched my arm while making a point. I didn't move away. That was the moment. Not dramatic, not cinematic. Just a choice to stay still when I should have stepped back. The kiss came later, in the most forgettable way possible. A brief, uncertain thing that lasted maybe 2 seconds. Enough time to know it was real. Enough time to know we'd crossed a line that didn't uncross itself just because we pulled apart. We didn't say anything afterward. No apologies. No declarations. Just that awful, Electric silence where you both understand that something irreversible has happened and neither of you is brave enough to name it. We said goodnight like normal people and went our separate ways. I lay in bed that night next to my partner, staring at the ceiling, replaying those 2 seconds over and over. I told myself it was a lapse, a one-time mistake, something I could bury and move on from. But even then, if I'm honest, I already knew. The mistake wasn't the kiss. The mistake was realizing I wanted it to happen again. After that night, everything split cleanly in two, even though nothing outwardly changed. At home, I was the same person I'd always been. Same routines, same questions about dinner, same automatic affection that looked convincing because it had been practiced for years. If my partner noticed anything different, they didn't say it. Or maybe they trusted me enough not to look. At work, I became someone else entirely, hyper-aware, cautious, calculating. We didn't talk about the kiss. Not in person, not in writing. The silence around it was deliberate, like we'd both signed an unspoken NDA. But the tension was everywhere. In the way we avoided eye contact in meetings and then immediately found it again. In the way neutral Slack messages carried subtext only we could read. We created rules without admitting we were doing it. No sitting next to each other in meetings. No one-on-one lunches. No messages after a certain hour. Each rule made us feel responsible, ethical even, while we ignored the obvious fact that we were already lying, if not with words, then with omissions. The secrecy was exhausting and exhilarating at the same time. I'd feel my phone vibrate in my pocket and my heart would spike before I even checked the screen. When it was her, it felt like winning something I wasn't supposed to be playing for. When it wasn't, there was relief mixed with disappointment. I became careful in ways I'd never been before. I deleted message threads. I memorized alibis I didn't technically need yet. I learned to switch emotional gears the second I walked through my front door. Sometimes I'd catch my reflection and barely recognize the version of myself who was so good at compartmentalizing. What scares me now, looking back, is how quickly the double life started to feel normal. Like this was just another responsibility to manage, another system to optimize. I told myself I was in control because nothing had really happened since the kiss. But control is a comforting illusion. And I was already living proof that I was capable of lying convincingly to others, and worse, to myself. The first signs weren't dramatic. No accusations, no confrontations, just small disruptions in the rhythm that had started to feel too smooth. It began with a comment from a coworker during a meeting offhand, almost joking. Something like, "You two always seem to be on the same page," followed by a glance that lingered half a second too long. I laughed it off. She did too. But afterward, we didn't look at each other for the rest of the hour. Then my partner asked a question one evening that was perfectly reasonable and somehow devastating. "You've been distracted lately. Is work getting worse?" I said yes without hesitation. It was true enough to pass. Still, my pulse didn't settle for a long time after. At the office, I started noticing patterns I hadn't before. Who arrived early, who stayed late, who watched instead of participating. There was one colleague in particular, someone observant, quiet, not prone to gossip, who began asking clarifying questions that felt unnecessary. About timelines, about who was involved in what, about why certain tasks were suddenly rerouted through me instead of their usual channels. Nothing explicit was said. That was the worst part. Suspicion doesn't announce itself. It leaks. It changes the air pressure in a room. I found myself rehearsing explanations for things nobody had asked me to explain yet. She noticed it too. I could tell by the way she'd stiffen when someone approached, by how our already careful distance became exaggerated. We stopped lingering after meetings entirely. Our messages became colder, stripped of anything that could be misread if seen out of context. But suspicion has momentum. Once you believe you're being watched, every glance confirms it. Every coincidence feels intentional. I started sleeping badly, waking up convinced I'd forgotten to delete something, say something, hide something. Nothing had been discovered. Not really. But the sense of safety we'd been clinging to was gone. And without it, the question I'd been avoiding started pressing in from all sides. If this comes out, who pays the price and how much of it will be mine to carry? The crisis didn't arrive with shouting or slammed doors. It came disguised as process. An email went out late Friday afternoon from HR, mandatory reviews of interdepartmental workflows. Routine language. Vague scope. But our names were both on the list of stakeholders required to attend the same alignment session the following week. A small thing, objectively. Except the colleague who'd been quietly observant was listed as the facilitator. I reread the email several times, looking for something that wasn't there. There was no accusation, no hint of misconduct. But HR doesn't insert itself without a reason. And they don't assign facilitators randomly. That weekend was unbearable. Every notification made my stomach drop. I checked my work calendar compulsively, as if it might change on its own. At home, my partner noticed something was wrong, really wrong this time. I was short, distant, restless in a way I couldn't mask. "You're somewhere else lately," they said on Sunday night. Not angry, concerned. That was worse. At work on Monday, she and I passed each other in the hallway and didn't even slow down. No nod, no acknowledgement. It felt deliberate, like we were both trying to erase evidence in real time. Later that day, she messaged me for the first time in nearly a week. "Are we in trouble?" I stared at the screen for a long time before replying. I wanted to reassure her. I wanted to tell her everything would be fine. Instead, I wrote the safest lie I could manage. "I don't know. But we need to be careful." The alignment session was scheduled for 90 minutes. 90 minutes in a glass-walled conference room with someone whose job it was to notice inconsistencies, to ask follow-up questions, to document observations. For the first time since this started, the fantasy cracked. This wasn't about stolen moments or emotional intimacy anymore. This was about exposure, about consequences that wouldn't stay contained to late nights and locked phones. I realized then that the story I'd been telling myself that I could manage this indefinitely was over. Something was going to break. The only question left was whether it would be by accident or by choice. The night before the session, I didn't sleep at all. I lay next to my partner, listening to their breathing, trying to imagine what it would sound like if I told the truth. I rehearsed it in fragments, half sentences, confessions without conclusions. None of them felt survivable. By morning, I'd convinced myself of something that felt rational at the time. Decisions don't have to be permanent to be real. I didn't need to decide everything. I just needed to decide what to do now. The alignment session was exactly what it pretended to be: flowcharts, timelines, questions that sounded neutral but landed heavy. The facilitator watched closely, not accusatory, just attentive. When inconsistencies came up, I jumped in quickly, over-explaining, smoothing edges that didn't need smoothing. I could feel myself performing competence as a kind of camouflage. She barely spoke. When she did, it was careful, measured, unimpeachable. I understood what she was doing, protecting herself, even if it meant leaving me exposed. I couldn't blame her. That, more than anything, forced my hand. In that room, with everyone watching but no one seeing, I made the decision. Not out loud, not dramatically, just a quiet internal click. I wasn't going to confess. Not to HR, not to my partner. Not now. I told myself it was strategic, that confessing under pressure would look like guilt, that silence was safer, that time would dull suspicion. I told myself I was protecting everyone involved. But underneath the justifications was a simpler truth I didn't want to face. I wasn't ready to accept the consequences. When the meeting ended, nothing had been exposed. No bombs dropped. People filed out, already mentally moving on. The crisis passed, at least on the surface. As I walked back to my desk, I felt something subtle in my chest. Not relief, not triumph. Commitment. I had chosen secrecy. And whether I liked it or not, that choice was going to demand a price. The days after the session were strangely quiet. Too quiet. No follow-up emails. No calendar holds from HR. No sudden shifts in how people treated me. On the outside, it looked like I'd imagined the whole thing. On the inside, everything felt sharper, more fragile. I carried the decision with me everywhere. It changed how I spoke, how I listened, how I moved through the office. Every interaction felt like it had weight now, like it could tip something unseen. I was polite to the point of stiffness, careful not to linger, careful not to seem evasive either. There's a narrow line between confidence and guilt, and I was walking it badly. She and I didn't talk for a while. Not really. No late messages. No accidental overlap. When we did cross paths, it was all professional distance, eye contact that ended too soon, conversations clipped and neutral. It should have felt like an ending. Instead, it felt like withdrawal. At home, the guilt didn't make me distant the way I expected. It made me attentive. I listened more. I volunteered to do things I'd been putting off for months. I told myself this was what trying looked like. But the effort felt rehearsed, like I was compensating for something rather than repairing it. What I hadn't anticipated was how lonely secrecy would feel once the adrenaline wore off. The fear had given the affair structure, urgency. Without it, there was just the knowledge of what I was carrying alone. I couldn't talk to anyone about it, not friends, not her, not the person sleeping next to me. At work one afternoon, she finally messaged me. Just one line. We can't keep pretending nothing happened. I stared at it longer than I should have. She was right, but acknowledging that felt like reopening a door I just forced shut. I didn't reply right away. I minimized the window and went back to my tasks, pretending I hadn't seen it. That's when it hit me. Choosing secrecy wasn't a single act. It was a daily one. And every day I kept choosing it. I was becoming someone I wasn't sure I recognized or respected anymore. Once the immediate threat faded, something else began to wear us down. Time. The secrecy stopped feeling sharp and thrilling and started feeling dull, abrasive, like sandpaper against the same spot, over and over. Every day we didn't address what had happened made it heavier, not lighter. The silence between us wasn't protective anymore, it was corrosive. We started slipping. Small things at first. A glance held too long in the break room. A message sent a little later than our self-imposed rules allowed. Not because we were reckless, but because we were tired. Tired of pretending the connection could be neatly archived like a completed project. I found myself resenting the discipline I'd chosen. Resenting how careful she remained while I was unraveling. Then resenting myself for that resentment. At home, I was present in body but scattered in mind. I'd nod during conversations and realize minutes later I hadn't heard a word. My partner noticed. Again. You're trying, they said one night, gently. But it feels like you're bracing for something. That was the most accurate description anyone had given. I was bracing. For discovery. For collapse. For relief. I didn't know which one I wanted anymore. At work, the observant colleague went back to being just a colleague. No more probing questions. No more lingering looks. Whatever suspicion had existed had either been dismissed or shelved. That should have made things easier. Instead, it made the risk feel optional again. Manageable. That's how erosion works. Not with force, but with permission. I started justifying things I wouldn't have justified months earlier. One coffee alone. One walk outside to clear our heads. Each time, I told myself I was still in control because I was choosing when to stop. But control isn't proven by restraint you haven't tested yet. And deep down, I know I was inching back toward the edge not because I wanted the fall, but because standing still had become unbearable. The line didn't reappear all at once. It crept back into focus slowly, like a border you only notice once you've already crossed it. It was her idea to talk. Not in code, not through carefully neutral messages, but in person. She suggested a walk during lunch, public enough to feel safe, casual enough to feel deniable. I agreed too quickly. That should have told me everything. We walked without a destination, circling the same few blocks near the office. At first, we stayed disciplined. Work updates. Harmless complaints. But then she stopped and looked at me in a way she hadn't since before the crisis, direct and guarded. I can't keep pretending this didn't matter, she said. She didn't say she missed me. She didn't say she wanted more. She didn't have to. What she was really saying was that the erasure was hurting more than the risk. I felt something give way in me then. Not resolve, fatigue. I admitted I felt the same. That the distance hadn't made things clearer, just quieter. That I'd chosen secrecy because it was easier than truth, not because it was right. We didn't touch. That somehow made it worse. The intimacy was all in the honesty, in finally naming what we'd been carefully orbiting for months. When we went back inside, nothing about us looked different. But the balance had shifted again. That evening, I deleted nothing. I didn't cover my tracks. I just sat with the knowledge that the affair, emotional or otherwise, was no longer a past event. It was active again. Alive. And with that came a familiar mix of fear and euphoria. The fear was obvious. The euphoria surprised me. I'd missed it more than I was willing to admit. That night, lying next to my partner, I realized the hardest part wasn't choosing between two people. It was accepting that I'd already chosen uncertainty and that I kept choosing it because some part of me felt more real there than anywhere else. After that walk, everything became a careful balance. I felt like a tightrope walker suspended over a pit I couldn't see, holding to lives in tension, aware that one wrong step would send everything tumbling. At work, we resumed our carefully orchestrated interactions, neutral emails, professional distance, nothing to hint at what happened outside the office. But now every glance, every word, carried weight. Even a casual comment from a coworker could feel like an X-ray, revealing more than I wanted exposed. At home, I was more attentive than ever. I cooked dinners I didn't feel like cooking. I asked questions I didn't want the answers to. I pretended my exhaustion was from work, my distracted moods from deadlines, my occasional blank stare from stress. All true, but incomplete. The tightrope wasn't just about hiding the affair anymore, it was about hiding myself from myself. I had to perform normalcy so convincingly that even I could forget the truth for brief stretches. And yet, the moments of stolen connection with her, however fleeting, felt electric. A single message pinged during a long day, a shared smile across a crowded floor, they became the highs that kept me going. Every risk felt worth it in that moment, but I knew the risk was real. I knew that the line separating thrill from disaster had narrowed to almost nothing, and that knowledge made every stolen moment sharper, more intoxicating, and terrifying all at once. The tightrope wasn't just a metaphor, it was my life now, and I could feel the rope swaying with every choice I made. The first real fracture came unexpectedly, during a routine Monday morning. I was sitting at my desk, pretending to review reports, when I noticed my partner's eyes lingering on me differently. Not accusatory, not suspicious, just an easy doubt. Later that evening, a simple question slipped out. "Who were you talking to on the phone during lunch today?" My heart froze. I stumbled through a vague answer, citing a coworker and some project clarification. They nodded, unconvinced but silent. That silence was heavier than any accusation could have been. At work, something similar happened. A colleague or friend really made an offhand comment. "You two seem unusually coordinated lately. Everything okay?" My stomach turned. I forced a laugh, deflected, and moved on. The observation was innocent on its face, but to me, it felt like an X-ray beam slicing through the careful partitions I'd built around my life. I realized then that I couldn't contain it forever. The tightrope wasn't just swaying, it had started to splinter. And with each small crack, the risk of everything collapsing grew. That night, I messaged her for the first time in days. Not a conversation starter, not a joke, just a single line. "We need to talk before this breaks everything." The words hung between us like a warning. We both knew the fracture wasn't just in our secret, it was in me, in my ability to keep pretending that I could have two lives without either one falling apart. I didn't know what to do next. I only knew that the illusion of control was slipping, faster than I could run. We met that evening in a quiet corner of a coffee shop, one of those places nobody notices even when it's full. No phones, no distractions, just the two of us and the tension that had been building for months. She spoke first. "We can't keep doing this. Something's going to give, and I'm not sure which of us will survive it." Her voice was calm, almost clinical, but there was a tremor underneath. I knew it. She knew I knew. I wanted to say I could handle it. I wanted to promise that I could keep our lives separate, neat, intact. But the truth was simpler and uglier. I was tired. I was scared, and part of me didn't want to stop. We went through every scenario, every possibility, every potential fallout. If we confessed at work, at home, to each other, it would be catastrophic. Careers, relationships, trust, reputations, everything on the line. If we stayed silent, the secret would grow, gnawing at us until it consumed us anyway. I realized, in that moment, that secrecy wasn't protection. It was a slow form of violence, a daily compromise of integrity and honesty. Every smile, every normal conversation with my partner, every professional interaction at work was a lie layered on top of another. And yet, despite knowing the consequences, the pull to continue just a little longer, just another stolen conversation, just one more touch was almost unbearable. We left that coffee shop without a clear decision, only a mutual understanding that our next move would define us. And for the first time, I wasn't sure which path I even wanted. The euphoria and the fear had merged. The secret was no longer a choice. It was a presence, shaping every thought, every action, every heartbeat. The week after that meeting was the hardest. Every interaction felt charged, every glance a reminder that the secret between us had grown into something living, something that could strike at any moment. I felt exposed, not in the sense that anyone else knew, but that I knew myself too clearly for comfort. At home, my partner's quiet suspicions became sharper. Little questions, little observations, moments that made me freeze mid-response. I was lying with one hand while trying to hold normalcy with the other. The tension built like a pressure cooker. At work, she and I returned to our professional facades, but the undercurrent was electric. Emails were neutral. Meetings were polite. But beneath that, every interaction was a negotiation of risk. Every misstep could unravel everything. One afternoon, a small but innocent slip, a misdirected message meant for her that landed in a group chat, almost exposed us. I caught it before anyone else, hard hammering, and deleted it in seconds. That moment crystallized everything. The secret was no longer a thrill. It was a weapon pointed at both of us, and one mistake could destroy everything. I sat at my desk for hours that day, staring at the blank screen, wondering how long I could keep walking this tightrope, wondering if the euphoria, the pull that had kept me going, was worth the constant dread. By evening, I made a choice, quiet and unannounced, a decision I would carry forward. I would keep the secret, not because it was safe or right, but because the alternative, truth, confrontation, fallout, felt unbearable. I knew, then, that I had committed not just to the affair, but to the daily, grinding lie that would define me for months, maybe years. And with that choice came a hollow kind of freedom, the freedom to continue, weighed down by the knowledge that I was slowly eroding the life I claimed to value most. It was a victory in one sense, and a betrayal in another, and the paradox would follow me everywhere. Now, months later, I can't decide if it was worth it. Some days, the stolen moments with her feel like oxygen, a reminder that I can still feel something intense, alive, undeniable. Other days, the secrecy feels like chains, a constant background hum of anxiety that follows me everywhere. I lie to my partner, and I lie to myself. I smile at them, and I feel guilty in a way words can't capture. At work, I interact with colleagues, keeping everything neutral, while a hidden story simmers just beneath the surface. The adrenaline that once made every meeting exciting now just makes me tired. I think about the life I could have had, honest, simple, maybe boring, and I grieve it quietly. And yet, I also know I can't completely undo what happened. The connection with her, the thrill, the forbidden intimacy, it's part of me now, whether I want it to be or not. Every choice has consequences, and every day I live with them. The secret has its price: peace of mind, integrity, trust, and I pay it willingly, because for now, confession feels impossible, and ending it altogether feels impossible to. So here I am, still caught between fear and euphoria, still walking the tightrope I built myself, still wondering if one day, someone, maybe my partner, maybe HR, maybe even her, will push me off. And maybe, when that day comes, I'll finally understand what all of this was really worth. I don't know if I'm asking for forgiveness. I don't even know if I deserve it. I just needed to put it down somewhere outside my head, somewhere real, somewhere that might understand how completely messed up it feels to love someone you shouldn't and to keep living with it anyway.